Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this very rainy day for our workshop on improving best practice. I can see quite a few are joining at the moment, so we'll start in a moment or so. So when I talk about it being an online workshop, I do use that term rather loosely because a workshop is quite difficult to achieve online, as I'm finding out. However, there are two ways that we have made this webinar interactive and therefore more workshop style. And one is we sent out a questionnaire to all registrants beforehand, asking them some questions about their attitudes to safety, the maturity of their culture and their organisation, what kinds of standards they've got in place. And the answers and the insights that you've given to me through those questionnaires, I've built into a thread throughout today's presentation to share with you some ideas. And then, of course, at the very end, I will have a Q&A session. We had some questions put to us through that questionnaire. But of course, if you have any questions coming up as you go through, in standard webinar fashion, there's a Q&A box. Just click in that box and type in your question, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. Okay, so I can see that most of you have now joined, so without any further ado, I will now move on. So before we go into the main presentation on improving safety through sharing best practice, I'll talk a little bit about me, just a little bit of context, and then a little bit about RiskX and our health and safety software, AssessNet. So a little bit about me then. I'm Nikki Porter. I'm the Managing Director for RiskX, and I've been in the TIC, or the testing, inspection and certification industry for more than 25 years now. And I've worked in roles from standards writing right through to implementing new technology to improve safety culture and everything in between. And throughout that process, I've led on a number of client consultancy projects on benchmarking, which is today's topic, and also on risk mapping, which has a link to it as well, all around building upon very strong safety performance and culture, proactive safety management to uncover best practice. So the objectives for today then, as promised in all of the pre-event materials, the first thing we're going to look at is what is this concept of identifying and benchmarking beacons of best practice, and why do we want to implement them? Then when we've understood the context and the concept, we'll have a look at the various different benchmarking approaches, specifically featuring on one that we have implemented for our clients here. And we'll look at some of the scoring methodologies that sit with that approach as well. When we're looking at approaches to benchmarking for sharing best practice, we're going to be looking at two main critical success factors. And one is employee engagement. So tips on winning hearts and minds, which we'll see as we go through that actually the concept of best practice benchmarking is based on a type of audit. And I know that that we all have our fill of audits, whether they be client audits or whether they be ISO audits or internal audits. So how do we make sure that this one is valuable and understood and aligned and really does win the hearts and minds of our employees? And then secondly, the key lever for any kind of best practice benchmarking is how are we going to easily collate information and disseminate that information and make decisions upon it? And clearly the answer is we need to use technology to do just that. So a little bit about RiskX then, our business, and AssessNet, our flagship health and safety software. So RiskX were established over 34 years ago and were based in Milton Keynes, which is where I am now. And it was established to start with as a specialist health and safety consultancy. And health and safety still sits at the heart of the subject matter expertise of our services today. Around 20 years ago, we launched AssessNet, and AssessNet is our flagship brand for our SaaS health and safety software platform. And today we service clients across a good cross-section of types of businesses, organisations and industries, ranging from commercial, government and charity sectors. And of course, we do have all of the expected certifications and security protocols, and we are also registered on GCAL 13. So one slide on what is AssessNet then, and anybody that wants to know a bit more detail about AssessNet, we can share some information with you offline after the event. We're more than happy to provide trial access and demos to you. But essentially, AssessNet is a modular-based health and safety system. And some of our clients use our software for just one process. That might be accident management or audit management. And some of our clients use a system for enterprise-wide risk management, using all 18 modules in the set. And regardless of what modules you take or how much AssessNet is embedded in your business, the system has 4 key areas of core functionality, if you like, that underpins the system. And those are on the screen right now. So first of all, Task Manager is the engine that sits behind AssessNet that manages all of the automation, all of the workflows, all of the task allocation and notifications and escalations. As you would expect, it has a full document management system sitting behind it for document audit trails and to enable you to upload all sorts of supporting information, documents, video files, etc., to any kind of health and safety assessment or process. As with most health and safety software, you will find that we have an employee portal, which means your wider employee population doesn't need access to the license of the system, but can actually access through a portal without a license to report an incident or a hazard or to download a digital risk assessment, etc. And then as well as standard dashboards and reporting that sits in the system itself, we also have data analytics through third-party BI tools as well. I mentioned that AssessNet is modular, and you can see popping up on the screen now all of the various different modules that we have within AssessNet. And outside of that, we also have some wraparound envelopes, project management and RAMS management. And again, what underpins all of these modules and pieces of core functionality are 4 things. One is a business intelligence data analytics tool for big data analysis, and that comes into play from a benchmarking perspective. As you would expect, we have mobile apps for relevant applications and modules, and actually we're just about to launch a new or senior adaptive version of that. And although we are UK-based, we have global clients, and certainly have UK clients who've got employees with English as a second language. So we have a suite of language packs to the product as well. And then perhaps our most recent addition is our API services, which we're just about to launch for connectivity with other systems that you might have in place, HR systems, sustainability systems, BI, etc. That's enough now about AssessNet and certainly the business and me for now, and we'll go on to the main presentation, which is all about best practice benchmarking. So in terms of the concept, we'll start to look at maturity levels in a moment, but once you are happy with your optimization of your safety performance and you've got good health and safety management systems in place and they are mature and they're operating optimum levels and you can see evidence of continual improvement and you can demonstrate that you are achieving all of your KPIs, the question then turns to, well, this is excellent, so how can I improve beyond that? And today's session is all about best practice sharing on the hypothesis that by identifying beacons of best practice amongst your sites or your divisions or your teams, or even your supplier base, and then replicating them across your whole business, you can make even further improvements to that. So before we move on to looking at some more detail, there are many ways that we can leverage best practice. Today I'm going to focus on a risk-based approach, because that's the approach that we take using benchmark auditing. I'm going to focus on safety, but clearly the principles apply to any facet of risk management, whether that be food safety or security, environmental management, energy management, etc. When we talk about beacons of best practice and identifying beacons of best practice, you can either hunt for those beacons of best practice, or better still, you can empower your people to show them to you, which really will be the crux of the approach today. And that's what sits at the heart of how to design a best practice benchmarking audit. So digital systems, safety leadership, ISO frameworks, strong safety culture, all need to be mature to be able to build a strong foundation for best practice sharing for it to be effective. So what I'm going to do now is go through a very simple illustration. that really just shows a very simplistic way of demonstrating different attitudes and maturity levels when it comes to safety management. And this will then set the scene for what we mean by moving beyond good health and safety performance. So before we do have a look at this, I would like to thank those of you who did have time to complete the pre-event questionnaire. I'll share some of the insights from that as we go through the presentation. But to kick off, around 3/4 of you here today have indicated that your business is ISO 45001 certified by a UCAS certified body. And you've all confirmed, every single one of you have confirmed, that you feel that the safety culture in your organisation is a strong, proactive and positive one. And encouraging 80% of you carry out site walkarounds. Most of those actually happen to be weekly or bi-weekly, and some of those happen to be monthly. And all three of these aspects are important if you are to get the most out of best practice benchmarking. So let's have a very quick look at this maturity chart that you can see in front of you. The first level really of safety approaches and safety attitude is ensuring that you are compliant with all best practice, compliant with all legislation and regulation that's out there. And in order to do that, and I term them compliance checkers, you have systematic processes in place. They're built around your legal obligations, they're aligned with the risks in your business, and often they are built around the client requirements that you have as part of your SLAs. And essentially, proactively managing risk in accordance with legal and contractual obligations tends to be what underpins compliance checkers. And ultimately, that means that there are legal registers in place, there are audits in place, maybe not external, but certainly internal, checklists. You have full control of the training and qualification matrices within your business and to ensure full compliance at all times with HSE law. Then we look at the middle area, which is performance managers, where you're building upon knowing that you and being confident you are compliant with law, and then you're building best practice frameworks, usually based on ISO management systems. And those ISO management systems are mature. And what sits, of course, at the heart of an ISO management system is the PDCA cycle, using continual improvement to measure success. And virtually everybody who's a performance manager will have BI, digital processes. They'll use scorecards and KPIs as part of their overall ISO certification process. So we're talking about a business who's very confident with their compliance levels, and now they are proactively seeking to continually improve their safety performance. And then we move on to excellence seekers, who are constantly focusing on consistently achieving high standards and exceeding those high standards. And really importantly, from a culture check perspective, excellence seekers will use typically failure regularly, and they'll use examples of failure to improve and certainly not to blame. And that's really important when you're asking employees to open their hearts and minds to sharing best practice. Using failure to improve and not to blame really does help make sure that best practice is rewarded and shared. So let's have a look at a 6-stage approach then to benchmarking. So benchmarking for best practice relies on the hypothesis that every business has pockets of best practice. And that's the hypothesis you're working to, that they are there. Locally developed good ideas is what I mean by best practice. And if those locally developed good ideas are then shared across a team or a group or a division or between divisions, then that shared best practice would have a positive impact on safety performance across the business. And that's what sits at the heart of benchmarking as a hypothesis. So the methodology that we're going to look through now is 6 stages and is underpinned by audits, benchmarking audits, to define what best practice is, where it is, and then reward and celebrate where that best practice is shared and where that best practice that has been shared has had a positive impact on the system. So we'll look at these 6 stages that range from the beginning of designing the best practice audit, right before you start the process, right through to after you've carried out the best practice audits and how you workshop them and provide best practice sharing awards and communication strategies. Let's look at number 1 then, designing your audit. So A best practice audit, and this is really important, is really different to an ISO audit or any kind of inspection-based audit. What you're doing on a best practice audit is you are looking for new ideas and you're looking for new ways of doing things and new ways of achieving your objectives. Often you are looking for something that the site or the team or the division don't view as best practice. It's just their standard practice, it's their way of doing things. And that can make things complicated, because if you ask your colleagues to share with you examples of best practice, they'll find it very hard sometimes to define what that looks like, because for them, best practice is just standard practice. Best practice audits really should focus primarily around site walkarounds. You have other types of audits and processes to make sure that you have control measures, checks and balances, and that you are doing what you say you're doing. And they generally come around ISO audits. But a best practice audit means that you need to use your observation skills and your listening skills to actually spot some of these areas of best practice, and then use good questioning techniques and dedicate listening time to a good cross-section of your employees on the shop floor. And that's absolutely key to identifying and uncovering beacons of best practice. Pre-audit communication, just like any kind of audit, is really, really important to help employees prepare for what they would like to show you. And that's the important thing. You're asking employees to show you what they would like to, as well as things that you pick up yourself. And most importantly, it's absolutely critical to enhance the mind and involve employees in what is important to them in a best practice benchmarking initiative. So before you even start putting pen to paper, the very first thing you should do is hold a best practice workshop before you design an audit. And I've got various examples of where I've either facilitated or taken part in a benchmarking workshop. And I find those that are most effective are ones that are held off-site. They use a third party. So somebody within the organisation, not an ISO auditor, not somebody who's checking they're doing things right. And quite often that third party can be either a coach or a mentor, or even a famous personality, perhaps an ex-sports personality who perhaps have coaching and mentoring and training services and consultancy now. But the important thing is that before you even start your audit, you understand from employees what they would like to see and what they would like to show you. And then we move on to the second step, which is carrying out audits. And in a moment, I'll share some examples of best practice. But first, let's look at some key considerations for carrying out those effective best practice benchmarking audits. So a little bit like the workshop, consider using a third-party auditor for impartiality. And it's not just for impartiality, it's the specific skills that they have in terms of being coaches or mentors and listening and observing. So all of the soft skills that you would expect somebody like that to have in place. Although considering using a third-party auditor has lots of benefits and I think is really important, having senior management visibly involved is absolutely critical. And to set the scene for the importance, to set the scene for the culture and the supportive nature and how important best practice is to you. So those senior managers should absolutely be involved in the site walkarounds and the audits. And they should also be part of building the benchmarking initiatives into any key objectives that they have for themselves or they have for their direct reports, and should also feature in SMT, senior management meetings. At least half of the audit should be on the shop floor as a site walkaround. And it should be focused on what you can see, and then discuss what you can see with employees on the shop floor. So some examples then of what I've seen and what some of you have showed me you've seen when you've been carrying out observation walkarounds that are looking at ideas and for best practice sharing. So one example, and this was an example at a logistics business which had several logistics or distribution centres in it. One of those distribution centres had, in the warehousing area, had a big show and tell table. It's a big tablecloth table, and it was covered with all sorts of broken parts to roll cages and generally the casters or the wheels, and showing damage in them. And there was a poster that explained how many of these roll cages were damaged in the last month, how many near misses were reported because of that damage, the cost to replace those and repair those roll cages, and the impact that that had on the business. And actually, there was an ideas box with a QR code, and that QR code went to an e-learning module that the client had on safe working advice for handling roll cages. So that sounds like a really simple, basic idea, having a show and tell table. And it might sound really basic. Well, how important to the business really was broken roll cages and a few broken casters that you can see on the table. Well, the difference was that when they rolled out these show and tell tables across all of their distribution centres, they saved £100,000 in the first year on repairing and replacing roll cages, and they reduced manual handling injuries by 70%. So that's the impact that something small as a piece of best practice can have. Somebody's given me an example of using QR codes again for safety quizzes, and this one happened to be for a Christmas advent calendar, whereby the theme was around the Christmas accident hotspot advent calendar. There were 12 posters around the factory in this instance. And those posters were put into places where most of the near misses had been reported over the previous 12-month period. And what that showed is by having a quiz that showed and put in people's minds where the areas of high risk were, that actually significantly reduced the incidence over the Christmas period when they implemented it. And the Christmas period happened to be, for some reason, a peak time for accidents for that particular business. There's a third example that I'll share with you that again came off the back of a different benchmarking audit that I've been part of, and that is in the staff rest area, there was a learning zone. And again, this is a different transport and logistics business. So what I mean by learning zone in the staff area is there was a little table in the corner with some comfy armchairs in the cafeteria area with a PC. And that PC had on it an online health and safety employee feedback survey branded See Something, Say Something. And I know See It Sorted or See Something, Say Something is quite a popular way of promoting hazard management. In this instance, there was an incentive. So it was an incentive that there's actually an espresso machine and a box of Kit Kats in this little corner as well. So if the idea being that if employees wanted to sit down, have a free drink from an espresso machine and a Kit Kat whilst they were filling the survey in, that increased the amount of feedback that was given. And not only did it increase the overall hazard reporting, but it also increased the idea sharing, which in turn reduced incidents. I don't go into any more specific examples right now, but not surprisingly, most examples that you've all shared with me today via the pre-event survey are focused on hazard reporting using campaigns such as See It and Sort It, Near Hits, 360-degree feedback, near miss reporting, etc. And some of you, I'm really pleased to see, have also indicated that you run an award system. I haven't got any detail about what any of those award systems look like. So if any of you who actually gave me that feedback are on the call today and you'd like to put some examples into the chat box, I can share those with the group as well. So that's all about carrying out audits and the kinds of examples of best practice that you can see. So let's look at recording examples of best practice then. So again, like many audits, like most audits these days, the preferred go-to is to have a mobile device so that you can record the outcome of an audit or the data from an audit on the go. So if you have to write it on paper, go away and then type it up again. And a best practice sharing audit is perhaps the most important type of audit, to have a tablet to record on the go. Because if we go back to what we're doing here, we're listening to people, we're trying to engage them, trying to put them at ease. We're trying to observe best practice ideas we can see all around us. And if we're trying to write things down or we're trying to gather data in a complicated way, that could be compromised. Photographs can say, you know, an image can deliver 1,000 words, can't it? So using photographs to illustrate examples of best practice are not only a really important and efficient way of collecting evidence of best practice, but actually it's quite a good way of disseminating that best practice when you're looking at sharing it as well. When you're recording the audits on the go. It's really important to highlight examples where behaviour and culture are driving best practice. Now, that becomes really important when we look at scoring in a moment. And then lastly and importantly, the records that you take as part of your best practice benchmarking audit should help facilitate communications and actions around lessons learned. And improvements off the back of lessons learned is achievable for businesses who already have a culture of using failure to learn from and improve rather than to blame. So let's have a look now at producing initial audit scores. And the example I'm going to show you here is again for the same national logistics business that I was talking about earlier on today, operating from several distribution centres. Some of those distribution centres were third-party operated as well, which adds another level of complexity for collaboration in it as well. So we'll look at what some of these things mean in a moment. But essentially, initial audit scores should be aligned with the risks and priorities in your business. So they're tailored to you and what's important to you. They're not dictated by an ISO standard. They're not dictated by customer audit. And there are three main aspects really that you should consider when formulating scoring. So the first aspect is elements of risk. So what and where are these risks? The second aspect is safety values, and that's the values that underpin your safety mission and therefore drive your culture in your business. And then thirdly, we're looking at performance influences, and these are the influences that have great impact on the effectiveness of risk management and are aligned with ISO 45001. So in the example that you can see here, and the elements of risk, the safety values and the performance influences are going to be very different for different businesses. But in this element, the 6 main areas of risk that needs to be looked at were work area environment, occupational hygiene, PPE. Arguably PPE should be separate. People, communication and training, equipment, transport and vehicles. That's no surprise, this is a distribution centre business. Stakeholder obligations and SLAs, and emergency preparedness, business continuity and response. And this business had 3 main safety values that needed to come through and be marked and scored as part of best practice benchmarking. The first value is doing the right thing. The second value is don't compromise. And the third value is call it out. And then the behaviours or the performance influencers, which are aligned 45001, and you recognise some of those here, are leadership and the strength of leadership, planning and the quality of planning, review and the robustness of review, behaviour and culture, and the operational controls in place to manage risk. So now let's have a look at sharing best practice. So the value of benchmarking audit is derived from the sharing of best practice. You can unpick as many areas of best practice as you like, but actually you're not going to improve performance unless those areas of best practice are then measured and shared and the impact then measured. And so rewards and scoring system and weighting should always be focused on where there has been a positive demonstrable impact from sharing best practice. Implementing best practice, so we've carried out a benchmarking audit, we've got lots of best practice that we've gathered, we've marked and we've scored that best practice, but how do we go about sharing that best practice? Because walking away from the audit and doing nothing isn't an option, because guess what, you'll come back to do the next audit and there'll be no improvement. So having workshops and having post-audit events and meetings and sessions of different descriptions are really important to start to implement the sharing of that best practice and having champions for best practice sharing throughout your divisions or your sites or your teams. And there's some key principles really to focus on. And one is involving senior management in that best practice sharing workshop. And again, consider an external facilitator. The ones that have been most effective that I've been part of is when we've used a third-party external facilitator who's specially trained in facilitating. Make them interactive, make them off-site. If you've got uniforms, make it a casual dress day. Put people at ease. And recreate some of those best practice examples during the workshop. So if you use the example that I brought up earlier on of the casters from roll cages on the show and tell table, recreate that in the workshop to talk about How can you improve on that? What's relevant to some sites and not to other sites, as an example. And really importantly, set improvement targets. Set something for people to aim for related to sharing the best practice. That sets accountability and it sets a structure around what's expected next. So when we are looking at determining award levels, I mentioned earlier on, it's really important that as well as looking at the three main aspects of scoring, that you're looking at weighting scores based on what's happened with that best practice. So, do a very heavy minus weighting if there really is no evidence of best practice in a particular risk area. Give a very small score if you can see something, but it's embryonic, it's only in its idea stage, it's not fully fledged or demonstrating impact where it's being used. The next level, which is silver, is best practice exists, and it's clear that it exists, and it's mature, but it's not being shared anywhere. And then the next level is gold, which is best practice exists and it has been shared, perhaps within a department or another distribution centre or another team, maybe a different shift. And then lastly, with a much heavier positive weighting, is that best practice does exist and it has been shared and it has driven performance improvement where it has been shared. And that's where you move from excellent to extraordinary. So awarding a maturity level to each example of best practice is absolutely fundamental to move beyond establishing examples to highlight where sharing that best practice has achieved a demonstrable improvement in performance, in risk in that business. So you've carried out benchmarking audits, you've gathered information from them, you've scored them, you've made sure there's some weighting around what's important to you and your business. And you've started to have some workshops to work out how you're going to share those pieces of best practice. Recognising achievements really does drive behaviour, and providing awards to reflect this must be motivational and celebratory, but they also must leave something on the table to strive for next. Where else do you go from that otherwise? So the overall bronze, silver, gold, platinum award system should really consider all three aspects covered by the audit, which is the elements of the risk, the safety values, and the performance influence. And when you're giving those awards, give the awards for each individual work area, element of risk, and then give an overall score as well, which falls within a banding of the scoring system, depending on what the scoring system that you're using are. And how you demonstrate and celebrate and reward, that can be very different. So I've worked with businesses who basically have huge benchmarking posters up in their site. So they're collectively showing in their site that they are the platinum holder of the benchmarking award for working area environment, for example. I've seen businesses use company newsletters, social media platforms, certificates for specific employees, staff conferences, employee awards, and the list goes on to really promote and recognise and celebrate best practice pockets and how they are shared and where they are shared. So that's the six-stage process to the benchmarking approach that I've described to you today. And then there are two other areas to look at. And one is employee engagement. And I would like to just go back to this again because it is so critical to the success of a best practice benchmarking program. And it really does start right at the beginning before you roll out a program, before you design and specify the program. And that is carry out an audit design workshop, a hearts and minds workshop, preferably with a third-party facilitator as being part of that. And be prepared to listen, be prepared to have your ideas challenged and the objectives behind why you're doing this challenged as well. And you'll find that actually if you then are honing and changing the design of what you thought you were going to be doing in line with actually what people are telling you you should be doing, that will put you in a position where you will find far more best practice. Aligning all messaging with safety values is really important. And if you've got a good culture, that is something that should be achievable for you. During the audit, to engage employees, use open questioning. Think about not having the standard BSI auditor sort of approach to that audit. Use open questioning, share lots of positive feedback on the shop floor. This isn't accredited by any third-party regulation body. You're not going to have UCAS breathing down your back for this. So You can structure the audit in the way that you want to, that's relevant to your people. You can share best practice on the shop floor. You can share ideas that you've had in other sites. If you're using a third party who've got extensive experience in this, they can share their positive ideas and experience from other businesses that you might be able to learn from as well. Listen, 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 and ask questions is absolutely key, as it is in many audits. And then post-award, so post providing an award for benchmarking best practice, carry out those audit review workshops, do that regularly. Don't just invest in that upfront audit design workshop, invest just as much in the audit review workshops as well, and on an ongoing basis. You'll all be familiar with the importance of that from your ISO positions. And really importantly, share the impact on the business. If you save money because of a piece of best practice, tell everybody you're saving that money. If you've reduced incidents or type of incident, tell people that. If you've reduced a particular risk level, risk rating, because of better controls, then share that as well. But winning the hearts and minds is really critical to the impact and the effectiveness of a programme like this. And then we'll finish off by looking at using technology to monitor best practice. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about AssessNet. Clearly, AssessNet can be used to help you manage best practice audits. But we'll look at 3 key areas of questions to ask yourself and key considerations to think about. And then we're quite happy to have a conversation with you after the event about how we can help you with these things as well. So what is the role of technology in all of this then? Well, let's start by looking at audits. So when you're carrying out audits, so the audit tool, the audit software you have a mobile companion app? Does it have offline data capture? A lot of you have sites that are in the field, literally in the field. We've got an energy provider on the event today, who I'm sure will be carrying out all sorts of works and dangerous activities on pylons, etc. And in areas where offline data capture is absolutely critical. Can you build your own audit questions, and can you make them really simple, and can you make them really complex? So therefore, do you have a built-in template manager to enable you to do that? Color-coded responses. I talk about bronze, silver, gold, platinum. You might have 1-star, 2-star, 5-star, 10-star. But actually, if you do have a color-coded benchmarking system, then actually having a color-coded response in your audit tool is really quite helpful to align with your benchmark scoring system. Do you have the ability to configure multiple scoring and weighting schemes and change those weighting schemes tailored to your specific audits and processes? And does it look at positive outcomes as well? Does it give plenty of opportunity for learned lessons and for sharing ideas? Then we look at the overall background picture of data management. Do you have the ability to configure dashboards at site level, at team level, subsidiary level? Do you have the ability to drill down into different award levels, bronze, silver, gold, or whatever system that you end up using? Can you link, and this is really important, again, to stop duplication, can you link the data that you gather from these kinds of audits with other compliance data? Do you have APIs? Do you have perhaps other modules in the same system where you want to type some kind of linkage together between, or some kind of correlation between sharing a piece of best practice and a reduction in incidents? And as part of that, do you have quite sophisticated BI storytelling that enables you to take snapshots of that data and visually look at very different granular levels of maturity scores, and perhaps have maps of shop floors or maps of factories or warehouses or offices where you can actually pinpoint where these pieces of best practice have been shown? So that's it for me for today. That's it for me covering the main thrust of benchmarking best practice. And we have got this bit of time now to go through some questions. I've received some questions from you today and some questions from you beforehand. So I'll go through some of these now. And if you've got any other questions, then do put them into the chat box, and we'll see how many of those we can pick up at the same time. Okay, so we've got a question here. We're subjected to several customer audits as well as ISO audits. How can we combine a benchmarking best practice audit with these? It's a good question. It's a tricky one, and it is tricky is the short answer actually, and that's because skill sets are very different between an ISO audit and a benchmarking best practice audit. Mindsets can also be very different. Best practice audits can have an element of go with the flow rather than be a fully structured audit plan. And that's why facilitators, coaches, mentors tend to have the right types of skills. So the answer is it's tricky, but it's possible. But you need to consider the different skill sets required, or the different approaches required in that. Another question then, have you got any examples of where best practice audits are carried out by team leaders or shift managers rather than external parties? Yeah, that's another good question. It's entirely possible to do this, but there are clearly additional benefits from using a third party. So the biggest one being you're using an independent, impartial, fresh set of eyes with no biases. They're fully independent, which in turn gives credibility, and it can help employees take it more seriously and make them feel more comfortable sharing their own ideas of best practice without there being any other type of agenda involved. Uncovering, as I just said, uncovering best practice does require strong soft skills and questioning techniques, and usually third-party auditors would be best placed to do that. A question around safety values then. So we don't have a set of safety values per se. How would the scoring system work for us? Okay, great question. So the beauty of a totally bespoke best practice benchmarking program is you can make it up. It's relevant to you and how you work. You can build the scoring system in line with whatever your objectives are, and you can weight it according to whatever is most important to your business. However, making company values or safety values of some description, part of that will be very beneficial in getting employee buy-in, and that's because values provide a common purpose, don't they? That employees should understand, work towards, and live by. Well, that's all from me today. If you have any other questions, and then you can see my email address on the screen right now. You can also see a different email address, help@, and that's the email address that you need if you want to discuss in detail anything further from today's event with you, regardless of whether or not that is how can we help support an entire program for you, or how can our audit software help you do that, or just have some more questions that you'd like to bounce off of me. I'm more than happy to give you the benefit of my experience there as well. So all that leaves me to say now is thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. I hope that it proved useful and insightful, and that you've all gone away with something from the event. We will be sending out a post-event survey, and as ever, we're very, very grateful if you can complete that for me. And all that leaves me to do is wish you a good rest of your day and happy Tuesday, and thank you for joining.